Thank you so much for joining in, Mahbubur. I think we could start perhaps the panel. Super excited, of course. So thank you all for joining us for the 5th edition of Curators Conversation. This particular edition talks about performing politics. Without further ado, let me just briefly introduce our panelists today. Mahbubur Rahman is a leading Bangladeshi artist and co-founder of Britto Art Trust. With work shown at Documenta 15, Venice Biennale and Gwangju Biennale, his works are in the major collections including Tate Modern and Kiran Museum of Art. And he is a recipient of the Bangladesh Shilpakala Academy Grand Prize. Thank you so much for joining us, Mahbubur. Melissa Loughnan is a fair director of Melbourne Art Fair and founder of Utopian Slums. Author of Australiana to Zeitgeist 2017, she has 20 plus years experience across curating, publishing and governance, including board roles at West Space and work with leading Australian institutions. Thank you so much for joining us today, Melissa. Schou-Hansen is a Danish artist, choreographer and dancer based in Oslo whose work engages with desire, mortality and colonial legacies. Co-curator of Mind Eater Festival, their work has been shown internationally and nominated for major Norwegian art prizes. Thank you, Louise. Vishal Kumaraswamy is an artist curator from Bengaluru, working across film, performance and computational arts, rooted in an anti-caste framework. He has exhibited globally, curated for Arts House Melbourne and collaborated with institutions including Tate Modern and Tanfest Ara. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us, for taking out the time this across various time zones to sort of allow us to make this happen. I think we can just start the panel with maybe some opening remarks.
Hi, I, as introduced, am a fairly new fair director at Melbourne Art Fair, which is in Australia. I thought this panel talk would be really interesting for me. The fair, while it's commercial, it's run by a not-for-profit foundation, and we receive public funding and we have a board. So it's an interesting structure for a commercial art fair. And within that structure, we have commissions, a video program, a large-scale sculpture and installation program. And I think it's a really important conversation to make sure that we support and hold our artists and find safe ways for them to perform so that they don't feel like they need to withdraw from opportunities for their work to be seen.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Louise, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Louis, and thank you so much for the invitation. As you briefly mentioned in the introduction, I have a background studying dance, so I worked as a dancer for many years. And then I've, in later years, moved more into doing my own production, so I've worked a lot in between museum and theatre context, but still very closely tied to sort of the theatre world in a way. Last year, I founded the festival Mind Eater together with Rona Borg-Skolsek, who's a Norwegian playwright and also curator. And what we were trying with this festival was that we saw a need for a space that can present some of these performative works that fall a bit in between genres and in between institutions. So they don't necessarily fit fully into a theatre, but they also don't really fit into a museum. So we're trying to build a platform that operates a bit as a parasite. So every year the plan is to move from space to space and then try to invite works that specifically fit into that kind of space. And then another focus we have with the festival is also emerging artists, as we saw this need in Oslo, as Oslo, where I'm based, is predominantly run by relatively big, well-established institutions. So most international artists that get invited here have to be somehow at a certain production level that I think is another discussion, but it's hard for newly established artists that are not working with major budgets and stuff like that to actually find their way into the field here. yeah, so the festival has only been running for 2 years. We just finished the second edition, and now we are in the run for like fundraising for next year.
Hey, I think for me, I've mostly kind of been contesting notions of what constitutes performance in certain spaces, how legibility and forms of legitimacy are kind of derived. That's what I've been sitting with. I work as an artist and a curator, so as an artist, I'm essentially involved in creating and devising performance works, even if I'm not the performer myself. But I think curating is a different context because you also have the added responsibility of translating context across the spaces that you're operating in, but also how do you translate works and histories that might arise in the public realm and then show up in sort of contemporary environments. So that's kind of where I've been sitting with and trying to think about how does that also kind of change maybe when you find yourself in political situations that aren't necessarily of your own making, but also aren't necessarily yours to kind of contend with directly, but you do become a party to that environment. So I think the tension in trying to restage like performance works or even bodies of performance thinking, that's really where I've been sitting at for the last maybe year or so.
Hi everybody, and thank you so much to give a chance to share our practice and my thought in this panel discussion. Complicated situation, very difficult about the funding or supporting art, getting the platform, or there's a lot of struggle we are passing through. So I started performance practice since I think 90s, early 90s, but it is not practicing here. So it's kind of movement we started, and there's a lot of after that there's a lot of artists got engaged to do the performance, and then later on we established a platform called Britto Art Trust. And this is it's an artisan organization. It's non-profit. And then we try to bring artists and giving opportunity to others to share their knowledge and thought process. And the conventional art practice are, it is there. Every organization or galleries are supporting or the institute. But the most experimental practice are totally, I won't say that it was more absent. So since our practice, that installation or performance, this kind of, or new media practice get a kind of visibility in our art scene, and it is also taking so many places afterwards. And there's some mainstream event like Asian Art Biennale, and then later Dhaka Art Summit also coming up, and they are really depending what we are thinking and what our artists are practicing. So that practice bring us to larger the audience or international platform. Like we got a chance to showcase our practice in last Documenta 15, and that presence was really highly appreciated, and the more more poetic way we came in the Documenta 15. There's a 7 project, but one project was more interesting. It's called Paghor and Palan, and we installed a kitchen and the kitchen garden. The kitchen was more performative activation. The different nationality came to cook there, and many institute, individual, they came to cook, and performance is becoming like a open platform. The last during the Documenta, like 100 days activation, and then the project crawling in a different institute or biennale. like the Tate Biennale. The practice, what we started in 2000 with the Britto, 2002, but that platform bringing a lot of artists and even the individual artists also practicing or getting a platform in a different international level. Like some performance artists did a project in Tate Modern or different festivals. So it is kind of I would say like the silence movement becoming more louder and more more exposed, but rather other practices are not getting that much. But it wasn't like the pre-decision to bring that practice in a even we didn't know how it's moved. It's more like innocent attitude and spontaneous response through our individual practice and then community-based practice. So that's kind of the move, how it came without like a condition, unconditional process. Yep.
To begin with the panel, I think we could perhaps start with the question. In your view, what distinguishes performance as a political act from other forms of expression, and the difference between performance as protest from protest as performance?
I'd say for me, performance has an ephemerality and an intimacy between the performer and the audience that other mediums don't have. And therefore, the impact is, I find, often greater than another medium, say video, because you have that kind of visceral experience from sort of being almost a part of the performance as an audience member, more so than with another art form. As to performance as protest versus protest as performance, from my experience of performance works in Australia, performance as protest might be gentle, it might be a dance piece. Protest as performance, from my view, from what I've experienced, may be more loud, maybe more confrontational, but I'm keen to hear others' thoughts.
I can continue a bit from here. I mean, I agree with Melissa on the ephemerality aspect, and I think that what is maybe particular to performance is also the kind of economy of attention that you see in it. Like, we are actually often invited to sit and experience something over a longer period of time than when you walk through a museum that is full of objects, for example. However, I actually find it a bit difficult to respond to that question, because I'm not sure what I think about this kind of dichotomy of distinguishing, as I also think that like any kind of performative work or any kind of artwork that is like placed in any public context is of course a political act in itself. But I think that what I experience at times with performance is that you have certain kind of performances that are being utilized as like a moment of protest, where it's extremely important that the message of that protest or that political agenda is actually very transparent. And you have other types of performances that work maybe more into, or like speak more into like a performance as like an artwork in itself that is to be exhibited, where you are maybe more allowed a bigger space of abstraction somehow, that you can work on like other levels where you actually allow an audience to sit and maybe make connections with things that are not normally obviously connected, and you get to sort of sit and think a bit about your own position in the world, but the political message that is inside of that performance, the purpose isn't necessarily for that to be extremely clear. So I think there's like sort of a difference there within the field of performance. I feel that, yeah, if that makes any sense.
I think I'll maybe just add a couple more things to what Melissa and Lee were saying. I think one of the things that I think about in that context is like the body as a political instrument, right? It's what keeps the threshold between the performer and the viewer, but also like it simultaneously is also like what is kind of activating the environment in that space. So I think the difficulty, I think, in thinking about protest as performance in certain contexts or maybe certain histories is hard to contend with within, I guess, presentation environments. Those are the two ways that I've been trying to contextualize that, because I think there is a presentation component to certain kinds of contemporary performance, and then there is a street aspect in our context, especially in India, coming from certain communities where the presentation is the kind of temporal inhabitation of that space. So the boundaries don't really exist there, but the body is still the political instrument that's moving between those two environments. So I think it changes for me, at least in understanding how that body or those bodies move, but then also brings up another question about what bodies really are moving between those spaces. So where does the real like kind of protest lie? Is it in the protest of refusal? Is it in a practice of kind of resisting assimilation into a different environment, or withholding the translation from, let's say, the street to the stage in some way? That's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Thanks, Vishal. Mahbubur?
I have the two different thinking about the performance art. Like, I'm a practicing artist, and I do also performance. So and I have my own perception about the performance. And while I am curating performance, so I try to give a lot of space to the other performance artists and put whatever they wanted can do it, and they did. And in Bangladeshi perspective, I really give a priority, to accommodate. All of them. It doesn't matter the quality is the good performance artists who do the serious performance. It doesn't matter. It's a matter to bring them together and put them together. And I also practice like in the performances, the different layers. The one is thought process before the performance, and then came to the act on the present on the public space or non-public space, and then the next stage how the others percept those performance. So the second layer, like a documentation, like a video or photograph. And I do the second curation about the photograph and video, and presents, the more or less my point of view with those work. That is the curatorial aspect. And my performance, I try to make it low voice, low down, not like exposed so much, because sometimes I feel very nervous while there's a lot of the viewer or doing performance kind of event based, that declare the space and do the performance. That is kind of take times to make an understanding with the viewer on the position and my situation. But the others, when I curate, I try to bring a lot of people, try to circulate as much as I can, but except while I do, I try to make it low profile or low down. So there's the two different attitude, because for me, the performance is very intimate act. It's me, it's for myself, and I want to understand my existence in the world. And when I see the lot of performance in my curatorial process, there's a kind of some people are very intimate, but some people are trying to make a stand or trying to bring any masses or any thought to the people. Sometimes it's become a very political, and while it came to very political, I am really conscious about how they wanted to speak about that. Because the last time we had a massive, it's not a kind of movement. I'm not, agree all the way, but there's some artists do the performance and they put it down the government, and this time it's a different government ruling the country, but we couldn't get the hope. So I was thinking, if you work on that process and you gain somehow through their activation or like performance, and then the things came in the other way around. So my question, what is your political stand if things are not going, what you want? Huh? So for that reason, political act to the performance, sometimes I feel confused because it's not absolute, but art is very independent. Art is very, for me, it's a very unique form, and I don't want to use art as a tool to speak or raise my voice, because I'm not sure that voice can exist for everyone, because everyone has a voice, and if I am to be very loud, then I want to stop my voice. Maybe the other voice will be dominated. So that's why I say my art, my practice is a very poetic way, but of course it is political, but not giving the answer, not giving the way, because I don't know what is the way. So this is kind of two thinking process, my engagement with the other and my engagement and working in myself. So that's just.
Thank you so much, Mahbubur. My next question would be, could you share a performance you encountered or curated that fundamentally unsettled systems of power and authority?
Shall I go?
Please do.
I think when thinking about Australian art, it's really important to think about our First Nations artists. This is not a work that I curated, certainly, but there's an artist, Richard Bell, who's a Australian First Nations artist who actually showed this work at Documenta 15. And that was his tent embassy work. It relates to, in 1972, a group of Aboriginal people put up a beach umbrella outside Parliament House and set up their own sort of embassy, which was sort of in act of protest for lack of acknowledgement and lack of fair treatment. And then his work has continued that legacy, and it's gone to Documenta 15, it's gone to Tate Modern. It's really important for a First Nations artist to have that voice and to have that audience beyond just Australian audience, and to see the power that the message can convey to other displaced communities and other First Nations communities that have been displaced by white settlement in their countries. So really important work, and I think he's been a really significant artist in Australia for a long time now.
Sounds really interesting, Melissa.
I think a lot about community performance. I think in the context of India, at least in the context of Bangalore and Karnataka, I think a lot about street performance and processions, particularly from like Dalit and Adivasi communities, because it's a kind of reclaiming of the space, like public spaces, particularly the access is quite contested. And I think it's one of the most enduring traditions of performance that's existed for hundreds of years. It actually where the wealth of context really exists. And I think something gets lost when it moves into your gallery space. So I do think a lot about that street and street performance cultures being kind of living archive. So yeah, I think that itself is quite radical.
I mean, I think we had, while we were curating the festival this year, I had conversations with a lot of friends and a lot of artists I also don't know. And I think there's something refreshing happening right now. And of course, it has a lot of relation to the whole like Israel-Palestine conflict. And more people around me in my field are kind of refusing to produce anything at the moment. And that's, that kind of refusal, almost a little bit turned on by. I really appreciate it. I'm a little bit there myself also right now that I'm not in the mood to make work. And of course this comes with like certain costs, so it suddenly puts you in this position of like also, we talk about it all the time, like what are we willing to kind of risk in order to look for like a better future somehow. So I think that's like an interesting kind of performative act that I see is happening more and more around right now. We had, like, to mention one specific work, but it's a little bit a side note to what I think is meant by the question. We had an artist called Edythe Stainton at the festival this year that made a work. There is a prize by. There's a lot of audience interaction, and often that kind of space can feel very violent because often you end up in this sort of like oppositional space where like you either have the audience that is very like an authority or you have the performer that is an authority. And in this case, Eve was kind of very much the authority in the space. So there's something with like how they invited the audiences in to participate without it feeling violent. And they were sort of given little notes. So it was almost like a kind of gossip that was spread in the room where they were invited like in a very soft way to go up and participate. But other than this, I follow Vishal in this idea of community performance. I actually find that where most of this kind of unsettling of systems happens is what I do with my friends, and it's what my friends are doing in kind of semi-private spaces where there's actually like space to play with things and actually talk about things and figuring things out. And you open up these spaces of like a different kind of sensibility that I just don't actually believe you find within an institution. I think the nature of an institution is to kind of unsettle that type of sensibility.
Thanks, Louise. Mahbubur?
I really appreciate about the space or the space is very important to practice my performance or the other artists. And at the same time, I also work with other institute like Dhaka Art Summit or Asian Art Biennale or Bengal Foundation, and try to understand those mainstream institute how they try to act with or engage with the performance art, and what our desire as an artist, as a performance artist. And the performance artist, while we started, we had a kind of attitude like the anti-establishment, anti-intimacy, everything we are not accepting, we are not happy with everything. We're always angry and reacting to our body. It's very hypo kind of things. But while I in some certain situation engage with those institute, and I try to understand my previous practice, my attitude and their attitude, because it is a established organization, and they're supporting performance and how it's fit with this, the kind of like the individual and very open attitude of art. So it's quite interesting. While I was working with those mainstream and established organization and trying to make understanding our attitude and bringing the practice not only the highly appreciated space or mainstream space or white cube space or institute, trying to bring in the very public space, very non-art space, or convert that space in mentally the mainstream space or art space in a different kind of non-art space attitude. So these are kind of language trying to engage and work on it. And at the same time, my many project, the other the activities like a kind of festival or kind of project, public art project, I put the performance session, engage many artists in the street or public space, even the very remote place, like in the village, and working with the in a border area with different ethnicity, different ethnic community, and trying to understand those ethnic community attitude, and their performance also become a part of our activities. But at the same time, their performance is more performing attitude, the ritualistic process. But this give us a lot of archival materials that give us a kind of knowledge to understand, there's a performance artist, the educated and, the who knows what is performance and why they are doing this thing. And while we go to those ethnic people or very general people, how they behave with their performing attitude. So that is kind of language or an understanding we're trying to bring them, and it's more like archiving the thought process and the collecting all the knowledge through this art activities or this process, the performative process.
Thank you so much, Mahbubur. I have so many questions for the panel, so I'll just go forward with the next one. What ethical responsibilities arise when curating performance that embody trauma, violence, or vulnerability? If anyone would like to just take that up.
I think it's really important to assess the vulnerability of the artist and the needs of the artist and the comfort levels as well. If the work is really puts them in a vulnerable position, it's worth thinking about how the space may be controlled to really hold and contain and make the performer feel safe, or not controlled. I think it really depends on the performance work and the performer themselves, really. But I know I attended a performance recently where it was intended for a larger audience, and then upon sort of the development of the work, it became more appropriate to have it in a small space with a smaller audience that was where the performer really kind of knew everyone that was in the group. And that was the nature of the work, and it was really powerful, and the people who were there, I think, were really moved by the work, but it wouldn't have been, I don't think it would have translated as well to a large audience. It wouldn't have had the respect that it needed and the space. But yeah, I think it's really case by case.
I could add, I think there's, to build on what Melissa is saying, I think there's also the aspect of responsibility of being generous towards the audience in order to make sure that they also meet the work in the way that the work wants to or need to be met, and as well as the artist, of course. So I think there's really important questions about when you invite maybe more sensitive performative works, to think about what kind of context, as Melissa said, you of course place them in, but also how do you disseminate these and how do you meet to the audience, and how can you actually be generous without doing that as this kind of sellout, we have to dumb things down, but how can you invite audiences into a generous space where they also understand how to sort of behave in that space in a way, and how to sort of meet the work. So I think there's also some kind of responsibility of knowing your audience a little bit, and also knowing who is it that we are trying to reach, who is it that we actually want to be in this space. Not all spaces are meant to be for everyone. I think it's important that there are spaces that are also closed off to certain groups or communities.
Anyone else would like to add in?
I think there's a community ownership piece to just add to what Melsan was saying. Just when you're kind of presenting works that deal with structural inequities, community, like communal histories of trauma, particularly in the context of caste in South Asia and in the diaspora, I think it's important to ensure that there is adequate like presence and active investment by the communities whose histories are being drawn from. This is, I think there's that piece, and there's the piece about structural inequities in presenting works, and both in terms of compensation of time, of labor, of effort. And I don't think those things should necessarily be separated. I think the presentation of the work is as important as the conditions and the histories that led to making the work in the first place. So that responsibility really, for me, falls onto the curator. It really comes on to them to ensure that that community responsibility is there. They themselves are invested in learning about the histories of the works that they're presenting, the people that they're working with, and they're kind of making sort of active gestures to ensure, like, you're not recreating those like traumatic histories, but you might be recontextualizing or reframing, not as a central voice, but as kind of a ancillary presence. Because the voice really needs to go back and be with those communities themselves.
When I was curating and giving a lot of space to the performance, and I'm telling, okay, you're free, whatever you want, and this is I don't want to make a barrier your thought process, but I feel super nervous, because once you say I'm giving you the lot of space, it means you don't know what's going to be happen, but it's happened. Like the one of the artists, he was drawing the poster, the political poster, and there's some very and by this time there is a one what's called the political meeting happened, and in that meeting there was the fundamentalist political parties meeting, and the one artist, he was drawing their posters. So I was super nervous, and I was trying to make big barrier with the other artists to I cannot stop him, but I don't know what's gonna be happen. But anyway, it didn't happen, and then when I put it that photograph in the in the show, and some people, from government side say they put it down, that photograph, and I don't want to put it down, that photograph, because this is not my responsibility to show what I curated. So then what I did, I just put it down, but I put it in the other way around. So it gives a chance to the viewer, they can turn other way and they can see the work. So it wasn't waved up from the show. It was there. It makes more attention, while the photograph was other way around. I mean the backside exposing. So, and the other project is my project in Dhaka Art Summit, first Dhaka Art Summit so far in 2012. They commissioned me to do the performance, and I was very ambitious. If someone is giving you the huge opportunity or platform, you become a very ambitious. But that was my wrong decision to be ambitious, because we never got this kind of support as a performance artist. So I made a life-size aquarium, and I wanted to come from the very high, from the top to the water, and do the performance in the water, and at the same time, live projection will be happening in the other room with in the box, on the box, in it for camera. But it's a funny thing. Before my performance, that glass broke down, and some people heard about when it just broke down. So I was I don't know what to do, and I was crying with him. And I said, no, it's a postpone, because the project is not there. And I do what I want to do, it's not happening. But I take the decision to do the performance with a broken space. So I act in the same way, and I was doing the same thing and drawing my blood and taking shower with my blood. This kind of things, but but it gives a different different language, different impact. But again, this attitude, when you are getting a lot of space, sometimes you are not going the one way, and you just trying to and getting the alternative. So there's the two both way. Like in my practice, in my curatorial practice, even giving the other artist space, but it's really nervous. It's very scary, or it's very insecure situation while you are engaged of both way, like the safe space and at the same time the unsafe space. So that's quite remarkable for me to deal with the performance art and artist.
Our next question would be, how do local traditions of ritual, ceremony, or protest shape your approach to curating performance?
I mean, I think the sort of primary way that, so I'm gonna answer it with the idea that thinking about performance as a ritual in itself, as I think that is maybe what is most present in my practice. So I would say the way that it informs my curating and the production of my own work is as someone who move in between theater spaces, museum spaces, and these more anarchist art spaces. It kind of brings me back to this question of economies of attention again. And there I think this ritual of how you sort of tie together an audience and a performance becomes very central. I think this with curating these sort of let's say old cultural rituals into these very wide Western exhibition spaces and theater spaces, I'm probably quite critical towards in general. I think we see a lot of it in the museums and theaters of this, that we go out to communities and we sort of do this process of cultural extraction where we find an idea in a community and we completely remove it from its original context in order to place it in a context where it actually becomes a little bit awkward or becomes read in a completely different way, or the sort of central aspects of what was actually maybe originally intended to be important in these rituals sort of lose its meaning.
I think my primary sort of mode of practice is starting from that space. I'm Dalit myself, so ritual ceremony is part of everyday life. But then there's the rituals of daily life. Labor is really difficult to separate from Dalit bodies into performance, into being able to do artistic practice is an extreme amount of luxury coming from those kind of positions. But I think something I do think about when I move between contexts, when I was curating in Australia the last 2-3 years, I think understanding the local context, both from an Aboriginal and a First Nations perspective, was helpful, and also understanding whose land are we on and what are the kind of ceremonies and rituals that we need to understand before we tread into this kind of space. But there's also, again, the other rituals of daily life that constitute what living in a particular environment looks like. For me, as working with a civic space, it's a space that has kind of responsibility to a local community, the community of North and West Melbourne, but also the larger Melbourne region. And for me, food is one aspect of how rituals are formed. And it's impossible to separate our own cultural practices coming from Dalit, Bahujan and Adivasi context that is separate from food, or the kind of work that you do and the way that you live your life. Those things are really deeply intertwined. And they also mirror the experience of living in cities and moving through those spaces in cities. So even in thinking about how do you curate performance environments for people to gather, not necessarily just to perform in that kind of I guess that relationship of audience and viewer or audience and performer. How do you really think about what is the grit and grime of daily life? How does that really show up in the work that you're making? So I think there is also creating space for the agency of attendees, of viewers, of audiences to bring in their own sort of rituals, to bring in their own ceremonies, and how they appear into those spaces or how they gather in those spaces. I think that kind of gives way to newer forms of ritual making in those spaces. So I think there's, like, for me, the tension between what is exalted as certain kinds of rituals that can't be changed, can't be shifted, because they are cultural sort of traditions and sort of totems. And then what is the path where you're kind of recontextualizing and reframing it in real time with the audience that's gathered there. I think, those are those two parts really.
Could you share an instance where the geography or architecture of a space fundamentally altered the meaning of a performance?
Louis, you lead, please.
I mean, like, of course, like, as I mentioned briefly in the beginning, this is kind of a very central question in what we try to do at Mindeater, because we do experience that a lot of performative work does not fit into these, like, institutions that we've already established, these, like, models and logics. So I think, I mean, like, where of course, we also make mistakes in the festival, and I think where I've maybe experienced it most clearly is when we have invited a work that, for example, come from, like, a very sort of black box theatrical space. It's built for that kind of space and that kind of audience relation, and we suddenly move it into like let's say like an exhibition space, for example. Then I mean, like, there's just something weird that happens, that it suddenly loses the meaning that was originally intended. And there I can sit, like, from a curatorial perspective and feel very clearly that, like, okay, we've obviously made a mistake here, because we've actually extracted this idea out of the space it was intended for, and we're placing it in a completely different context. And I mean, like, sometimes it can be interesting too, right? Like, you can also get lucky with these things, that suddenly it works in a space that it wasn't necessarily intended for. But I do think with these, like, performative works, we try to work a lot with it in Mindeater, and we really try to think carefully about what. I mean, I essentially think that architecture and space is completely central for any kind of work that you present.
I was just going to say that in my current role as a director of an art fair, it is really difficult to curate performance, because not everyone attending the fair is interested in stopping and watching a performance, and that can be really difficult for framing that performance and making sure it is a respectful space when there's possibly chatter in the background. Certainly it's something that we really have to think strongly about, and why we haven't reframed our live component of our fair for the last couple of years, because we just haven't felt like we've really, in the current political climate, been able to kind of give that respectful space.
The space or geographical position is very important. Sometime, like our one project that I already mentioned, that Pakgor and Palan, that, the kitchen curtain and kitchen. Well, we are doing this performative act in Kassel, and the weather-wise and the atmosphere-wise, we have a different dealings, different kind of experience. Well, we take it the same project to the Biennale in Riyadh. The weather is quite different, and people are also different, and then the activation become another way. It's twist like a different direction and face the different, the challenge. Even the build up the kitchen with the bamboo structure and the plantation over there. And while we take it to the Paris, that is also like the short-term kitchen performative activation in the fair. And the two project is a long durational project, and things are growing, the space is transforming time to time, different kind of people are coming and going in a different time, different time. But in the fair, it gives a different kind of viewer and attitude, and our position is a different challenge. And then we did the same project, same concept project in the coastal zone in Bangladesh, while the victim, the flood victim, to feed the flood victim people, stand beside those people, and we installed that the kitchen over there for 7 days, for every day, so 500 people, one meal, one meal. But that is like visually and structurally, and the act was thousands times different. If you compare the castle or Venice Biennale or Paris, the audience and the arty people and the viewer, they came to see the art, or they are trying to understand the art. And while we install the kitchen in the coastal zone for flood victim people, the sense is quite different. But we are interpreting this is the art activities. So it's quite interesting. While the project in installing in different location and different purpose, different vision. So that's quite interesting for us to run this, kind of ongoing performative project with the food culture, food politics, and at the same time, making understanding the viewers and the weather-wise, the environment-wise. So that's a different kind of challenge and different kind of archiving we are gathering through this project. So that's why I wanted to share this project.
Yes, there's two very specific things that came to mind that I was trying to look up the link for it, which I'll probably share later. One is a work called Running Machine in 2022, was shown at Arts House. It was the same venue that I was curating, and they were kind of doing it at the time that I was developing the exhibitions, and I think seeing the whole breadth of development, rehearsal, how they built all of the things, and then seeing the performance, and not being involved at all and really experiencing it for the first time there. I think it was one of the best ways I've seen somebody reconfigure an entire space. There's a traditional black box theater, but they kind of moved the performance between the building and the street outside. And multiple performers were coming from disability studies. The performers themselves were disabled, and thinking a lot about how technology plays a role in translating certain kinds of experiences. I can't find any documentation of it, but it's one of those things that I don't know how they would have been documented. It was very difficult to think about or even photograph. But you do experience and go on a journey with the performers as the space is being recontextualized and kind of worked right around you. You become the people who are enabling this kind of recontextualization of a physical space, of the architecture of the building itself. The other is a group of performance makers in Bangalore called Citizens of Stage. They're a bunch of friends of mine, and they do a lot of work that recontextualizes the architecture of the buildings that they work in. It's a very sort of athletic, dynamic set of works. It's very fast-paced. It's incredibly sort of mesmerizing to watch. But you're also constantly in a kind of state of tension because you're afraid for the bodies coming into contact with these things like pillars and walls and doors in the spaces. And it stops just at the precipice of becoming contact works. So it's, I think those two works are something that I think a lot about. I think a lot about Citizens of Stage and when I'm thinking about how bodies move through public spaces in that way.
What role does the audience play as witness, participant, or even disruptor in performances staged as public gestures? How do curators mediate a relationship between the performing body and public, especially in politically sensitive contexts?
Sure. I made some notes yesterday, and I was just trying to find parts of my notes. But I think I just keep coming back to sort of Dalit cultural practices, because the work that I've been making over the last few years is looking at the funeral procession within Dalit cultures and traditional practices. But something that happens is it's a procession that's going through public space. We're kind of bringing in people who are witnesses, who are viewers, and the roles are not defined. Like the structure is essentially you have some drummers, some percussionists, you have some people who are dancing. If it's a funeral, you have some wailers, you have some other people throwing flowers. But none of these roles are concrete, right? They're not defined. And you move through to the best of your ability. If you have the ability to dance, you kind of dance. If you have the ability to sing or like play the drums, you do those things. But they're not rigorous in that way, and they're always a fluid, moving sort of organism. And something that I think a lot about is that it's like, actually, I've joined other processions that I had nothing to do with. They were not my family members or people that I knew. But there is an invitation. An invitation exists because there is a shared understanding of that space being a communal space, that the street is a communal space. So for me, that's really where I think about how do I then try and translate that feeling of how audiences are always welcome into certain spaces. As a curator, less so, because I'm not the one performing, I'm not the one making the works. But certainly in just thinking about how they even, again, present themselves in that space. But as an artist, I think that's where that is, I'm completing a PhD, and that is the focus of my PhD. It is participatory performance. It is how do I bring people into that space? What are the protocols? What are the rituals? How do people kind of form these things to the best of their own agency and autonomy? And we're not making sort of some prescriptive model for how people show up within performance environments. So yeah, those are like my final thoughts, and I'll stop talking right now. Yeah, I think I've had a few instances where some questions have come up about the politics of a certain work that's being presented. But I think this is where, for me, closing the gap between the bodies and the people who are performing and the artists themselves who are performing and the politics that they're espousing are in line with what they do and what you do as a curator generally. Like the minute it gets separated and brought out of it, I think that's when it starts to become difficult, and you put in a position of having to contend with or translate the fact that the politics might not reflect the politics of the institution or the space. I think those are questions, at least for me, that institutions usually need to answer, because it's for them to work reflexively, and bending the institution to like meet the politics of the artist is like more, I think, important for me. But I do hear your kind of question, because I have not worked at all in the context of India. I've been based there for a few years. I've been in and out, but I've not really worked. I'm technically still from Bangalore. I will always be from Bangalore, but I don't really work. I collaborate and develop works, but I don't show, because it's difficult to have even this conversation with institutions and say, hey, we can't actually, somebody's espousing a certain kind of politics. They have to be allowed to have that expression. If it's not allowed, then it becomes difficult to contend with it. So, yeah, I guess that's just my way of like dealing with it, is to not work with institutions, and I don't think that's the best approach, really.
No, but I think it's very interesting what you're talking about, Vishal. Maybe we'd love to pick up on this at some other point.
I mean, I can speak a bit like from the perspective of a performer. I think you always experience the audience as a participator in the performance, whether that is what you want or not. I mean, I think I always get surprised. Like, I perform less and less, but I do still once in a while get invited into things and can find like enjoyment in it. But like, I think it's so interesting with these like kind of kinesthetic transfers of like energy that is like happening at all times when you are on a stage or like performing in front of an audience, because I think most audiences don't realize the kind of power you actually have to direct the energy of a performance, because of course when you're standing in front of them in a very vulnerable position, like you are like constantly doing these like micro readings of people's faces to get a sense of like, okay, where is the crowd? It's like, I think the most clear example of maybe like a stand-up comedy show where it's very clear this negotiation that is going on all the time, because if you want to land your jokes, you need to know exactly where your audience is at all times. And I think any kind of performative work works on the same levels. They might just be more subtle in their negotiation. But I definitely think as from like the perspective of the performance, the audience will always be a participatory audience, because they do essentially direct a lot of what is going to happen, even if things are super choreographed. Yeah.
That's very interesting, Louis. Mahbubur, any thoughts?
That's quite an interesting question. But, I just this year, I visited one temple in Rangamati in the hill tracks. It's quite interesting. While I visited that temple, I found around this temple all the consumer product, like, the cheese, the water, chocolate, biscuit, a lot of tiny, tiny packets. They're selling. I didn't realize why they're selling these things so much. Then I entered to the another temple. It's a Buddhist temple. So I thought, oh, I don't want to visit inside because I have to take off my shoe. I don't want to take off my shoe. Then finally I decided, okay, let's see that. But when I see the the outer side, a lot of plastic are around. So I feel really bad because this is the place for this spiritual practice or ritualistic space. Why there's so much plastics? And then I entered to the temple. I found that all the people are offering water. It's like the plastic bottle, the water in the plastic bottle, the kind of brand, but a mineral bottle, and then chips or biscuit in the packet, sweet in the packet, tiny packet to the brand. So they offer these things. So I was thinking, now how the culture is shifting, how the ritual also shifting to offer the real fruits or very on the very like a banana leaf or something which is very nature oriented, very connectivity is there, and the water maybe from the river or from the source of the nature, but the water they're offering is a bottle water and then sweet in the packet. It's quite interesting how the culture and the belief and the ritualistic attitude changing. And this year we actually we started that procession called Pahila Boishak celebration. We make a big procession. We make a fine art institute. We do the lot of big structure, trying to revive the tradition and culture, or the tradition or cultural form to introduce the the urban people or make kind of festival more traditional perception. But this will change totally because of the political. It's become a political statement because the position is very big in the in the town. It gives a huge impact. So the government take over that the freedom and thinking and the attitude, and they execute it on their own way, and they've got the same amount of audience. So that's the kind of the it's just giving at the question. So what is the culture? What is the ritual? What is the what do we want, and whatever the audience and whom we are working for. So that makes a lot of question. So for me, I really appreciate more intimate engagement, and that intimate engagement, if it's pursued to individual, one of the radiate in your community or spreading out your society, it will give some another impact. But to institutional process or bringing finalize the things and controlling through the institute or the government or the ministry or established organization or some people who are really powerful and who is trying to manipulate the human focus a certain kind of artist. So I was trying to understand why they focusing that artist or the media or critic, why they're focusing that. So I was trying to understand why they're focusing, the among the big project, 1-2 artists, make them hero. So do we want to make a hero through our artistic practice, or we want to live with the artistic practice? So that's the kind of questioning is coming to me, or trying to understand how I'm, engage my art practice or curatorial practice. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mahbubur. I think the closing question today would be, how do you see documentation functioning in performances that are ephemeral yet politically urgent? If anyone would like to probably have a brief response to this last question.
I'm just going to jump in and say that again, I think it's about community ownership. Like, who gets to own those documents? What happens, especially if you're like staging and working with artists who like historically not had their own archives or records? How do you then like kind of? I think there's a different way of working that problem is in the rights, and how do you think about like image rights and sharing and those kinds of things. But I think documentation is it's also just like what the final opportunity to involve the community that you're working with and ensure that they themselves are documenting and telling the stories. And it might look different and sound different and feel different to what a standard might be, but that is like the importance is to document it in a way that they feel able to do so.
Thank you so much, Vishal. Anyone else?
I can jump in. I think, I think that is maybe not traditionally thought about as documentation, but that I've been interested in lately is this idea of gossip. I mean, like, we talk to our friends all the time. So like there's something that I've been starting to like take a bit more seriously, and that is exactly like how performances that are ephemeral, that you're maybe sitting in a group where some people have seen it and some haven't. How does that and the urgencies of it get mediated through communities via gossip? And I think, like, a lot of countries have like different traditions for this. Like, you've seen it a lot in like queer communities in different countries, that you develop these like secret languages in order to speak below like the authorities. You've seen it a lot in like kind of feminist spaces, that gossip has also been a very central way, or like important way, to disseminate information that was sensitive. So I think gossip is a very interesting way of thinking about documentation and how that can actually affect performances at the moment.
Thoughts?
Well, when I was speaking earlier about, with some particular works being where the performer might feel really vulnerable and they might choose to perform to in a more contained space to a more comfortable audience, the documentation part becomes quite tricky, because it might be an entirely different audience that's then viewing the work that the work is not intended for. So I think it's, documentation needs to be in consultation with the artists, and, whether that's film or video, I think the way that it's disseminated and the way that it's taken, I think it has to be consultative.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
I actually, I'm traveling these days. I was in LA and now I am in Vancouver. So it's a very early in the morning. So it's quite interesting. I was visiting many museums like Mette or Broad Museum and other. And there's a lot of work. I was so inspired, like, the photograph of the performance or some photograph in the past. So, the connectivity, the periodically how it's connecting the documentation. It's like a 60s photograph I'm watching now, and I was trying to interpret in my way. So that's quite important for me. And even while I was, whatever I do, I try to capture the moment. And it has a two layers. It's a timing project, like performance, ephemeral things. And if you transform to the another materials, like even some artists do the performance, and they also following that performatic gesture in their painting or drawing. Again, like, how it's scrolling to one medium to another, one time to another time. So the documentation of the video and photograph, even the performance, how when people are capturing the photograph, and they find their own, the frame. They're trying to capture the moment, what they like, right? So that is kind of on a different stage, different layers, and it's it's kind of documentaries is keeping in your mind or your memory this thing. At the same time, that documentation also your memory, take out from your memory and putting to the people to see things through the who did the performance or photograph. So that's quite important. Even my project, I'm very conscious to appointed some people to capture. And the other process, like the world is becoming very tiny. It's like the one village, and the communication materials is online, like a social media. So you're seeing the things and you're uploading on your way to your page, and it is also circulating to other, and you're getting another viewer. It's a different layers is coming. And again, the archive is very important for us because we are not living in this world for ever. One day we'll leave this world, and the memory would be very interesting to keep for other people to read my time, other time. So aspect, I feel it's very valuable to keep the memory for for the another time.
Thank you so much to all our wonderful speakers and to the audience for joining us this evening. It's been a wonderful conversation, and we hope to see you all in the next edition. Thank you so much.